تحية كبيرة لرواد الأعمال بالشارقة. نواصل المهرجان كما يقول جدول أعماله بمنح المبدعين حقهم، واليوم يشرفنا أن نستضيف فنانة تعرض أعمالها حول العالم وفازت بعديد من الجوائز الدولية، وهي معروفة كخبيرة رائدة في التصوير الفوتوغرافي بأفريقيا.
And we continue with, as the agenda says, giving creatives their due. And today we are honored to host a widely exhibited visual artist who has won numerous industry accolades around the world, and who has been known as one of the leading experts on photography from Africa.
نرحب بعايدة ملونة، المدير المؤسس لمهرجان آدس للتصوير الفوتوغرافي، إلى دردشة معكم. اسمحوا لي أرحب على خشبة المسرح يديرها محمد سمجي من مدير Gulf Photo Plus.
Please allow me to welcome on stage Aida Muluneh, founder and director of Addis Photo Fest, for a chat moderated by Mohamed, the director of Gulf Photo Plus. Aida, Mohamed, the stage is all yours.
Welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Aida Muluneh. I think it's better if I stand, if you don't mind, because I need to see my slides. So thank you, everybody, for being here. It's really a great honor to be part of this forum. Often, coming from the art world, a lot of people in business think that art is not business, but in actuality, it is a business form. So for me, it's a great honor to be here. Thank you for all of you for being present. Thank you for Mohamed as well. He's going to be asking me some tough questions. So first, I would like to present to you, to give you an idea of who I am, the kind of work that I've been doing across Africa, and also to give you a sense of what photography means to me, and also what culture means to me, and what is cultural entrepreneurship. So I'll try to stay within my time limit, but apologies if I'm okay. So when we talk about creativity and cultural entrepreneurship, it's interesting because I found a document in 2016 by Ernst & Young that looked at the creative sector across the globe. And then what they looked at was a creative sector combining Africa and the Middle East. And it ended up being actually a $36 billion industry. And often we take these kind of things for granted, not realizing that, when I speak about the creative sector, it's not only about photography, but it's about music, it's about dance, it's about theater, it's all the forms of creativity. So for me, I've always found that culture has to be part of development, especially coming from Ethiopia and currently living in West Africa. I realize that culture is sort of the tie that binds us, but it's also a form that teaches the world of who we are. So for example, one thing that I always tell politicians, the way that we promote our countries is not, a politician in a suit and tie going and saying, come to Ethiopia. It's actually the creative sector that has been doing that work. And as most of you are familiar with the city of Sharjah, that has a lot of institutions, a lot of museums and so forth, this city has understood the value of culture and how that becomes sort of a connecting point for introducing society or introducing a country to those I might not know about it. So for me, I started photography when I was 16. My education was really in Canada. And the key thing for me of entering into photography was growing up in the 80s in Canada. When we heard about, all the media coverage of the famine in Ethiopia, I often found it sort of almost disturbing that this was only one perspective that people had of my country. And often, I can ask all of you, when you think of Africa, what do you think? Most of you will probably, the first thing that pops into your mind might be a safari, zebra, or famine, or these cliches. And these are actually embedded through mass communication, through images. And often I say that image has the power to actually, shift perceptions, but also can formulate perspectives. So from my journey, I wanted to share with you how I got to this point, why am I here today, and to kind of give you sort of a rundown of who are the key people that have been in my life that have contributed sort of to my progress. So going back, I just want to give you some examples of some of the photographers from the continent. Photographers like Malik Sidibe, who I was fortunate enough to meet a few times, is really the godfather for us for photography. And here was a Malian photographer who, all he did for many years was take portraits inside of his studio meticulously of his community, not having any intentions of being in museums or exhibiting in galleries and so forth, but he felt the need to document his people. And because we have these images, we know what that time period looks like. How did people dress? Who were they? And so forth. And even I encourage you all to go online and to really look at the work. It's a different way that he was presenting what Africa is and who we are as people. The next photographer for me is Gordon Parks. Gordon Parks is an African-American photographer, probably one of the most, the biggest legends for us. And he was really dynamic in the sense that he was documenting history at a very pinnacle time in American history, which became sort of the key images that gave us insight into the other side of who are African Americans. And personally for me, a photographer like Chester Higgins, this was really my first mentor. And the one thing that I've always believed in, regardless of what you do in your field, always have connecting points with people who you aspire to be, because you end up learning a lot from them. And for me, Chester was one of those people that I admired his work. I met him at a museum, and I just told him, can I have your number? This is before emails and so forth. And it really became a pinnacle point of driving my career and helping me understand what is photography and the role that we play as image makers and the role that we play as also communicators of a specific time and a specific time period, and also messages that we want to transmit. And through that, I started my visual journey. As you can hear by my accent, I'm from Ethiopia, but because I grew up outside, I have a lot of, obviously, Western influences. But I've always been passionate about my country. A majority of my work has always been about Ethiopia and the continent. And so when I went back to Ethiopia in 2001, I believe, one of the key things for me was, how do I document a country that I left at the age of 5? And how do I present it in a way that the audience can understand that this place is actually more complex than the one image? And through that, what was important to me was to sort of have connecting points. And the advantages of photography is that you learn so much from all spectrums of life. So you have an opportunity to take a photograph of a leader, or you have an opportunity to take a photograph of the guy at the corner of the store. Through all of this, you actually end up learning, and this sort of builds your character of understanding, especially as photojournalists, what is happening within that society. And I've been fortunate to have worked for publications such as the Washington Post, Time Magazine, and so forth. And to me, what I found that was really key is that the image of Africa, and I believe it's the same for your region as well, is that it is so underrepresented, and it's often shown through a different perspective that is not necessarily documented by us. And this is why I feel it's very important that the more storytellers that we have from our own regions, the more diverse the story is going to be. And through this journey, to me, what I've always found quite important is that I want to share with the world what Ethiopia looks like, and I want to share with the world my side of the story. But my side of the story is also one perspective. And that I've always found to be quite important to be able to express. Because I realized traveling and speaking in very many different places, most people have no idea about Africa. You know, most people only either haven't traveled or haven't really dug in to really find out what is a continent about. And for me, this has been the ultimate goal, is that through images, how do I transmit these messages and how do I share who we are as a people and also as a continent within that. And as we move forward, having spent many years in photojournalism, most people only know me by my fine art work, but I'm still a photojournalist. I still teach, and I also run the festival. I've always found that photojournalism is the basis of photography, because you first have to learn how to tell a story through a set of images before you can get into the actual art of what I'm about to show you. And through this sort of process of spending many years in the field, I've done a lot of work with the UN, I've shot, for several publications and what have you, I realized over time that what I wanted to say, I couldn't say it in photojournalism, and this is where I ended up going into fine art. And through my fine art work, it really became an opportunity to express sort of the experiences that I've had, the thoughts that I have, and also to share a different way of looking at photography. And through that, when I first started this collection, and this was actually the first sort of instance, this was by a curator named Simone Jami, who was basically the first person to provoke me in order for me to get into this line of telling stories through these forms of images. It really became the beginning of a new form of expressing what I have to share with you. And through this, a lot of my work has, colors. I work specifically with body painting, and the reason that I work with body painting is because I do a lot of research on traditional African art and looking at a lot of the traditions of our continent. In the European context, we've been referred as, the traditional work being primitive, but in actuality, I find that the traditional work actually is more contemporary than the contemporary, and it creates such a huge value that even when you look online, Picasso's biggest influence was Africa. There's a lot of papers taken from this, and there's a lot of work that influenced the direction of sort of modern art in Europe and what have you. And through this, to me, it's been really a journey of trying to navigate not only as being an artist, not only as being someone who advocates for specific things, but also how do we get this industry moving to the next step? How do we get our photographers into the international market? Because at the end, however you want to look at it, we are selling a commodity. Whether it's our ideas, whether it's our images, whether it's our prints, this is a business form within it. And for me, I've always found it important to be able to educate photographers in the continent to understand that photography is a profession that has a whole system behind it. And my main concern has always been is how do we get African photographers within the international market, within an industry that is very difficult to enter. So through all this time, when I've been doing a lot of the artwork, I realized that I wanted to go into the next phase of how do I use my art as a form of advocacy. And I do a lot of advocacy work around the environment. So for example, this is a collection of work that I've done for WaterAid, looking at how water scarcity impacts the lives of women. For many of you, you might not think about how water impacts your life because you live in the luxury of a country that has water. But for those in the continent, and especially in Ethiopia, water is something that impacts not only our health, but the education of women, the advancement of women, and also very specifically, as a nation, I believe that women also possess, they're the key components to moving us into the next phase of the nation. So through this kind of project, one of the main conversations for me is that, yeah, as a journalist, I could have done the work in the typical, NGO photos that many of you might have seen with the kid with the water or the well and so forth. But I realized we've seen enough of these images, and I wanted to have a different interpretation and to engage a different audience that is already bombarded by the typical cliche images that we see often. The next thing that I want to show you is, this was probably one of the biggest honors that I have received. I was the commission artist for the last year's Nobel Peace Prize. And again, I wanted to utilize my artwork on how do I transmit this message. And if you remember, last year's winner was the World Food Program, and the topic was specifically of how hunger is used as a tool for war. And I shot these works in Côte d'Ivoire, in Abidjan, and what was very specific for me is that all the work that I do, for me, it's how do I put my personal story within it, because I have to find a connecting point. And to me, the human experience, regardless of where you live, it always has similar threads. And these are the threads that I really look for. So for example, in this image, this was a representation, I selected 10 countries around the world to talk about how war and hunger is connected. Yemen was the example for this. This one, I had Namibia. I don't know if any of you know, but one of the first genocides took place in Namibia before the World Wars. And then Ethiopia, because currently, we're having our own problems within it. And, in each work, what I try to do is really how do I use the space, and regardless of location. And even if you look at this image in the far corner, in French, it says La Route à Gloire. And I didn't really expect to see this on a wall. It was just by coincidence. So I decided, there's certain things, as I always say, divine order, divine coincidences. And I felt, okay, this will be the title of the collection. So moving on, and I think, these kind of conversations are very important because it's an education opportunity. I'm a big believer in education because I think that, even for myself, I still consider myself to be a student, but we have an expression in Ethiopia where it says, he who learns teaches. So even from the moment that I arrived in Addis Ababa, when I moved back in 2008, it was really important for me to start teaching what has been taught by the mentors that I've had throughout my career, because I realized it wasn't just going to an institution or going to a school to learn. You also need to have exchanges, and you also need to have others that have gone further than you to be able to pass on that knowledge base. And through that, I started doing many workshops in Addis Ababa. We used to do a lot of photo walks, and I have a company called Desta for Africa, and I realized that we have to build a market within Addis Ababa. We have to build a market within East Africa in order to be able to get ourselves into the international platforms. And through that, that's how Addis Photo Fest came about, because I realized it wasn't just about teaching photographers to be photographers, but I also had to teach the audience and the community to understand what is photography. Because for many of you, when I say photography, maybe what you're thinking is wedding photography or studio or portraits or selfies. But actually, photography has such a big impact within our lives. Starting from your home, for example, you have a memory of your time as you age or as your kids get older and so forth. So photography has something very deep within society. It has influences within economics, because also it is a form of creating perceptions, as I mentioned earlier. But at the same time also is that it can also form politics at the end of the day. And this is why I believe that having an event like Addis Photo Fest, the way that we built the event, is really to try to do an international event and bringing photographers from all over the world. And through this event, what we look for is not just, we're not just looking for the top stars in the photo industry, we're also supporting emerging talents. So for example, if there's a photographer from Uruguay who comes to Ethiopia and meets a photographer from Nigeria, this meeting would have never happened. And this is the one thing that I'm a believer in, is that we're moving into a diverse world. Globalization is at our doorstep, which means that we have to also come together in order for each of our sectors to move forward. And through the festival, we've done several workshops. We've even done lectures. And it's really, my ultimate goal is how do we move photographers in order to have these sort of cross-continent conversations. And over the years, the festival has grown. We've gotten more visibility. And the key thing for me outside of that is that we are building a global community. And this is so important for me because I realize, as someone who has grown up in different parts of the world, I realize that it's so important that we share sort of our knowledge base, because I believe that photographers anywhere in the world share the same challenges, but also they have solutions that we can exchange together. And through that, for me, the biggest sort of pleasure is when I see photographers who have come through our system and have actually succeeded. So, for example, Mulugeta Ayena became really the first African to win a world, what do you call it? He was the first photographer to win the World Press Awards, which made me really honored, as an Ethiopian, to see his work being able to sort of shine a light on a very difficult story. Even photographer like Muara Rajonore, she's from Madagascar. I've been mentoring her from very early stages, and to finally see that she's getting into the international realm. And it's really, it's sort of, in my country, there's a saying that your legacy is not how much money you have in your account, but how many people you've taken to the next step. So photographers like Jonas Tadessa, and even for this Uruguayan photographer, Pablo Alberenga, for example, for him, he won the Sony Award, he came to Ethiopia, and it's just a very interesting sort of experience for me. And through all of this, one of the key things at the end of the day is that culture is so relevant, creativity is so relevant. I don't care which sector that you're in, this is such an important factor. And for me to be here presenting this is just to share with you just a small bits from our end of the world, and also to understand that I believe that creativity is a tool that brings people together and builds bridges at the end of the day. So thank you very much. I hope that was that 15 minutes?
Timing was perfect. Thank you, Aida. And I'm one of the lucky ones who's actually been to the Addis Photo Fest. I think it was 2017? No, 2016. And the coming together of artists, not just from Ethiopia, but from around Africa and from the rest of the world, was incredible. And the kind of movement that Aida started has had ripple effects across the world. And I've been lucky enough to meet some of these artists and seen their development. And some of the people we've exhibited. So it's great to see that. So Aida, I want to ask you, we're here today as part of the Sharjah Entrepreneurship Festival. And you and I live culture and creativity, that's what we do, but sometimes I feel that the importance of culture is perhaps lost on a lot of people. And it was striking to see that when your photos came up, everybody kind of stopped from their phones and started looking at the photos. And I think again it underlines the importance of photography and storytelling and art. And we're sitting here amongst a lot of change makers, thought leaders, decision makers, entrepreneurs. I want to ask you to articulate perhaps why culture is so important, and with development of the economy and things like that, what is it about culture that makes an impact that perhaps some people don't necessarily think of?
I mean, culture has so many impacts, not only from an economic standpoint, but really from shifting people's perceptions. So, for example, when we started doing the Addis Photo Fest in 2010, there was never a festival there wasn't even really a photo exhibition that was taking place. And the one thing that we started seeing is that once we started doing these activities, I think the first Addis Photo Fest, there was only maybe 5 photographers from Ethiopia. In the last edition, we had about 38. And I realized that by having these sort of public engagement and having these kind of events, you actually are able to develop the industry as well. And through the workshops and through all these kind of different panels and what have you, the one thing that I always noticed was the changing billboard. I remember when I first came to Ethiopia, the billboard photography was crap, And then over time, I realized that, okay, we're having an influence because I started seeing the quality of the images changing. And that, in a business language, is that photography is needed for everything, So if you're trying to promote your city, trying to promote your brand, photography is such an integral part of it. And within that context, the way that I see it is that photography is part of culture, and it is relevant because at the end of the day, this is a time period where it has such a huge social behavioral impact on making us understand, not only for the world to understand, but for us to understand ourselves. And what I always find disappointing is that, especially in Africa, culture is never taken into consideration. But I feel that culture is such an integral part of our development, because when you look at the youth, what are the youth consuming? They're consuming heavily on culture. So whether you want to call it music, images, all these new things that are coming in. But how much of that do we control, and how much of that content have we developed ourselves? Or are we just accepting what's coming from outside? And this is one thing for me that I take quite seriously.
It's interesting you say that a lot of the culture is being exported to us, especially in the global south. Are you seeing that changing? I mean, I know the empowerment that you facilitated of Ethiopian photographers, having their own voice and forcing their own narratives rather than being dictated or imposed from the outside. And I know that a lot of your work, whether it's being part of the jury of the World Press Photo or the work that you champion and mentor, is about that. Why is that so important to make sure that our stories are being told by us in our way and on our terms?
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a saying, correct me if I'm wrong, like the story is told from the hunter, not from the lion, So, I mean, we're in a world of media and communication, and, this device is such a powerful tool, and for the first time in our history, we're actually connected. And through that connection, I feel that we have to also tell our stories. And granted, for example, I think in the industry, especially in the mass media industry, it's so important to have a diversity within it, because through diversity, you're able to get access to things that you normally don't get access to. So for example, a European photographer flying into my country for 10 days is not gonna have the same perspective as a photographer who actually lives there, breathes and drinks the water of the country to understand where is the actual story. And this is why a lot of the images that you see of Africa are often skewed into one direction. And it's just, I think in the past 10 years or something like that, that all of a sudden the market started looking at photography from Africa and art from Africa, even to the point now where, we're being auctioned in Sotheby's and Christie House and so forth. So there's obviously a value within it, but I'm a believer that the more variety, the more options. The more options means that you get to discover new things that you might not have had access to before.
And do you think that's changing? I gave a talk, I gave a workshop to students in Holland a few years ago, and I asked them, when you think of Africa, what do you think about? And these are art students, third year, and what I heard was incredible. It was, AIDS and famine, or violence and guns, or, animals, or the Lion King, and I was incredibly struck at how uneducated they are. And I think imagery that you see, whether it's on media or TV or whatever, reinforces this. Are you seeing that there is a shift? And, there's a lot of work to be done for sure, but what gives you hope that, these narratives are changing?
I mean, I'm very happy that there's more photographers in the market. As you know, there's a lot than I think even in the past 5 years. I think that's, a big push that everyone has been moving towards. Just to give you an idea, when I juried the World Press, it was 83,000 submissions. Out of that, I think only 15% were women. Out of that, I think it was only 1% from Africa. So we still have a long way to go to even enter into these competitions and so forth. But for me, I find it quite important that the market is shifting. But again, it comes back to especially accountability on the ground. I'm a believer that I function as a business because I believe in self-sustainability, even though it's challenging in itself. But this is a market, It's such a huge market that we're not even scratching the surfaces of it. And I've seen the change of perceptions as it relates to different photographers entering into different publications. Even there was one year when we had National Geographic come, just because they did a grant writing workshop. It was the most that they've had of Africans actually entering into their program. So all of this takes time, but also in order to make that change happen, you have to do the work. And as you know, it's quite challenging within it. And the other thing also is I go back to education. I find that a lot of the European and Western education curriculums for photography are quite archaic, and they're not, they haven't really advanced with the shift of the market. And I always find it surprising. I feel like the Brazilians are the ones that are always asking to put my work in their education textbooks. So there's definitely a shift that's happening, but the rest of the world needs to catch up because we've been producing work regardless of the visibility. I'm not a new person. I'm not inventing anything new. There's people behind me that have done way more work,
You mentioned the market, so I want to switch gears a bit and ask you about some of these young cultural practitioners, creatives, photographers, artists that you work with a lot in Cote d'Ivoire and Ethiopia. Are you, as they come out and they start getting educated and learn how to make images, What is the landscape for them to be successful? You know, because artists, if you think about it, are entrepreneurs in their way, right? They produce work, whether it's photography or short films or movies. They publish books, they give workshops. So they're in essence a business by themselves. And you know, I know how challenging it is for artists here, for example, to get funding for their work and things like that. What do you say is the outlook for them at the current moment, and where do you see it going?
I mean, there are two things that I teach. I say you have to do work for your stomach and work for your heart. So the work that you do for your stomach is to pay your rent, to get you more equipment and so forth. The work that you do for your heart is really your passion projects. And one thing that I've always understood is that, and the things that I teach to the students is professionalism is so important, because as photographers, you know, there's a lot of hustle you have to do, you know, and you have to run a business, really, in fact. But at the same time, you have to know what your destiny is. What type of photographer do you want to be? And in the market that we exist in, it's a very tough market to break into. But there is so many other things, you know, there's a lot to do still. So for me, the first thing is that, you know, for photographers, what I try to advise them, and the one thing that I've seen also in the shift, is that the more business-oriented that you are, and often, you know, artists will say, well, I don't want to be a business person because it removes me from the artistry. And I'm like, what are you talking about? How are you going to live, you know? So the sooner you understand the business side of it, the sooner you also understand how you can sort of guide your career forward. And over the years, this is something that I've always been really pushing forward, because I've felt that not enough of us know the professional side of our industry. Not enough of us understand the business aspect of how to grow our businesses. And that's why for me it's so important to be here, because I do want creatives to understand that systemizing yourself is so crucial within that. And if you know, the most successful ones are the ones that have understood why marketing is important, why having your proper business plan is important, why, you know, networking is important. All these things play a hand in it. So it's not just about being in your studio, you know, hiding, creating work, thinking somebody's going to discover you. You have to actually go out into the world and engage and show what you have produced.
So you mentioned the word hustle, and we talk about this all the time, about how, you know, one of the things that we share is this, like, constant hustling to get support and funding for, whether it's for exhibitions, festivals, to fund artist projects, produce catalogs, and what have you. You know, the cultural industry contributes annually $2.25 trillion to the GDP. And yet, when we go to, especially the private sector, to say, hey, we want to run a festival, we need some money, it's always a challenge. We have a lot of these people here who control the purse strings to, you know, sponsorship funds or, you know, CSR initiatives. What would you say to them here as to why they should consider as a very important source of funding to support us and the cultural industries, whether it's, you know, young artists, festivals, thought-provoking discussions, art? What would you say to them? This is your chance.
I mean, for me, I'm really trying to build a self-sustainable model, which is so crucial. And there is an economic viability, I believe, in what we do. To me, I've always found that having, for example, every corporation has a CSR, you know what I'm saying? But even though they have that, they rarely invest in the visual arts. If you look at a lot of sponsorship, tends to be for performing arts. But in actuality, the echoes of visual art goes much more further than performing arts. So within that, what we're looking for is investment. We're not looking for, you know, it's not like an NGO, you know. We're trying to have investors, and the way that we work is that it's a very structured system just like yours. And within that, it's like, how do we grow our business to each phase? And this means that, especially for me, the way that I function is looking for partners that understand the long term. It's not about short term. Short term is the easy way. And this is why, you know, there's a lot of foreign culture institutions in Africa. You know, they give you $5,000 and you're supposed to be like, yay, you know, but it doesn't get you anywhere. You know, you're back in that trap. And what I'm trying to do, and especially for a lot of the cultural entrepreneurs in Africa, is that we have to build a system where, you know, as an example, like banks don't loan us money. Even though we're a business, even though we're working in a specific commodity, even though we have track record and so forth. So these kind of things are very relevant, and I think that system has to change, especially in the continent, on why we need investments from local corporations, because often we get support from outside before we even get any support from those that are on the ground that actually see our work, you know. So within that, it's like for anyone that's here, I'm mostly interested in working long term. I'm interested in someone who has the same vision that I have, which is how do we move mass communication into the international platform, and also how do we use this tool to kind of bring us together and to share stories that, you know, in fact, has an impact on our daily life.
So you've been coming to Dubai for a while. You came for our, you know, your solo show at Gulf Photo Plus. And then you had your big show here at the museum in Sharjah, which I hope many of you saw. And you're here now. What do you see here that interests you, or that is, you know, that's something that stood out for you in terms of the spirit of entrepreneurship and the spirit of making things happen?
I mean, I'm really a believer that for the creatives, I believe that Sharjah is an incubator of that sector. And I hope that the city of Sharjah will really look at the continent and support incubating sort of the talent base. I've seen all the facilities that are here. I mean, I've also visited Abu Dhabi and also Dubai. But the unique thing about here is that from the governmental standpoint, there's a big belief on why culture is relevant and why culture is important. So me being here is because of that, you know, and these are sort of the long-term planning that I'm interested in on how do we sort of create this bridge between both of our continents, and at the same time as well, how do we develop talent that will have an impact on our home base.
Great. One last question, and then we can wrap this up. What are you working on next, and what can we expect to see from you?
Why are you asking me this question? I'm working on many things. I mean, I'm going to be launching the festival in Abidjan, so it's a new brand that I'll be launching. And also, I think during this COVID time, what was the one thing that we really saw was the virtual existence was so relevant. And I realized as Africans, we don't exist in the virtual in a strong platform. So we're currently working on an online publication and also a selling point in order to bring photographers from the continent into the global market, outside of us just doing an event in Addis Ababa or doing an event here and there, but something that is embedded within a specific virtual platform.
Fabulous. One round of applause for Aida Muluneh, and please check her work out if you haven't seen it. Great.
Good. Okay.